The 90s was an era of transformation for the gaming world. In 1994, Sony completely changed the game with the launch of the PlayStation 1, a console that delivered a tenfold hardware leap by swapping out 60 megabyte cartridges for 700 megabyte CDs. But that revolution was just the beginning. With every generation, Sony set new standards for hardware. In this video, we're going to look under the hood of every PlayStation generation to see exactly what hardware upgrades we got with each version. GPU. An examination of the graphics processing unit (GPU) power across PlayStation generations best illustrates the exponential and incredible growth of computational power in video games. This journey began with the PlayStation 1, which with its 32-bit processor sparked the 3D graphics revolution. The power of this GPU seems minuscule today and is estimated to be around 66 million flops. The next major leap occurred with the PlayStation 2 and its graphics synthesizer, which brought the power level to gigaflops, achieving 6.2 gigaflops, nearly 100 times its predecessor. The PlayStation 3 continued this trend with its RSX GPU built by NVIDIA and powered the computational power to about 230 gigaflops. However, it was the entry into the PlayStation 4 generation that permanently changed the unit of measurement, moving us into the teraflops, T-flops era. This console, at 1.84 teraflops of power, was a massive leap over the PS3. The mid-generation version, the PS4 Pro, aimed at delivering 4K games, more than double this power, reaching 4.2 teraflops. The current generation, the PlayStation 5, with its RDNA2 architecture and capabilities like ray tracing, drastically increased this power once again, achieving 10.28 teraflops. Finally, the PlayStation 5 Pro delivered a significant mid-generational upgrade by offering 16.7 teraflops of standard computational power. This evolutionary path from 66 million flops in the PS1 to 16.7 teraflops in the PS5 Pro signifies astonishing growth in graphical power over 3 decades. GPU cores. PlayStation 1 featured one-core MIP SR3000 that handled all computations, game logic, and artificial intelligence by itself. PlayStation 2. With the Emotion Engine processor, it officially had one main core, but its power was heavily augmented by 2D vector unit (VU) coprocessors for heavy graphical and physics calculations. PlayStation 3 used a complex and asymmetrical cell architecture, which included one main core, PPE, for managing the operating system, and 7 synergistic processing element (SPE) coprocessors out of 8 available for heavy processing. This 1+7 design was powerful but notoriously challenging to program for. PlayStation 4. Sony shifted to a simpler PC-like architecture using 8 homogeneous cores, AMD Jaguar. This move made game development significantly easier. The Pro version also had the same 8 cores but at a higher frequency. PlayStation 5. This console also has 8 cores, but with a much more modern and powerful AMD Zen 2 architecture. Here the quality of the cores is the main leap, not just the quantity. This processor also supports SMT, simultaneous multithreading, meaning each physical core can manage 2 computational threads. As a result, the PS5 has 8 physical cores and 16 logical threads. The CPU in the PS5 Pro, the same 8-core AMD Zen 2 chip found in the original PS5, 8, but with the ability to boost to higher clock speeds when needed. CPU. Review of the central processing units, CPUs in PlayStation generations, clearly shows the evolution of Sony's strategy from complex custom chips to modern efficient architectures. This path began with the PlayStation 1 and its 32-bit MIPS processor at a very low frequency of 33.8 MHz. The real leap came with the PlayStation 2 and its Emotion engine, which at a frequency of about 299 MHz represented a nearly tenfold jump over the previous generation. But the PlayStation 3 was a paradigm shift with its ambitious Cell processor at an astonishing frequency of 3.2 GHz for the main PPE core. This CPU was very powerful in theory, but its complex multi-core architecture, SPES, made it extremely difficult to program for. For the next generation, Sony completely changed its strategy and moved to a PC-like architecture in the PlayStation 4, an 8-core AMD Jaguar processor at 1.6 GHz. Although 1.6 GHz might seem slower than the 3.2 GHz of the PS3, having 8 true cores and a much more efficient x86 architecture made it far more powerful in practice and much more optimal for developers. The PS4 Pro also retained the same 8-core Jaguar chip, but increased its frequency by about 33% to 2.13 GHz. The biggest generational leap, however, occurred with the PlayStation 5, which uses an 8-core AMD Zen 2 processor with a variable frequency of up to 3.5 GHz. This was a massive architectural jump from Jaguar that brought processing power to a completely new level. Finally, the PlayStation 5 Pro has also retained the same 8-core Zen 2 chip, but with a high-frequency mode allows it to operate 10% faster, reaching a frequency of 3.85 GHz to deliver more processing power. RAM. An examination of the amount of RAM in PlayStation consoles perhaps demonstrates the generational leap and the massive increase in game complexity more than any other specification. This path began with the PlayStation 1, which made early 3D experiences possible with only 2 MB of main RAM and 1 MB of video RAM, VRAM. The next generation, the PlayStation 2, significantly increased this amount, utilizing 32 MB of main RAM along with 4 MB of video RAM, EDRAM, which was sufficient for building the larger worlds of that time. The real turning point was the PlayStation 3, which had a total of 512 MB of RAM. However, this memory was split: 256 MB of main RAM XDR for the processor and 256 MB of video RAM GDDR3 for the graphics. A split architecture that initially created challenges for developers. Learning from this, Sony made a revolutionary leap with the PlayStation 4 using 8 GB of unified GDDR5 RAM. This single, highest speed architecture made work much easier for creators. The upgraded PS4 Pro also retained the same 8 GB of GDDR5 RAM, but cleverly added 1 GB of the slower DDR3 RAM to handle operating system tasks, freeing up more high-speed memory for games. This pattern was repeated in the current generation. The PlayStation 5 was released with 16 GB of unified GDDR6 RAM, a twofold jump from the previous generation. Finally, the PlayStation 5 Pro, although it also has 16 GB of GDDR6 RAM, albeit a faster type, similarly to the PS4 Pro, managed to provide developers with about 1.2 GB more high-speed RAM by adding 2 GB of extra RAM DDR5 for the operating system. This evolutionary path from 3 MB in the PS1 to over 16 GB in the PS5 Pro clearly shows how the memory requirements for games have increased exponentially. Internal storage. An examination of the internal storage capacity of PlayStation consoles shows the platform's evolution from a device for running discs to a system for fully installing massive games. This journey began with the PlayStation 1, which essentially lacked any internal storage. All game progress was saved on 1 MB. Memory cards. The PlayStation 2 continued the same pattern with 8 MB memory cards, but by offering an expansion bay, It provided the option to add an optional internal HDD, usually 40 gigabytes, for the first time, although this was only used by a limited number of games. The real turning point was the release of the PlayStation 3, which made internal HDD storage a standard. This generation began with the 20 GB and 60 GB models, and over its lifespan with the release of slim and super slim models saw a significant capacity increase to 120 gigabytes, 160 gigabytes, 250 gigabytes, and finally 500 gigabytes, though a very low-cost 12 gigabyte flash model was also released. The PlayStation 4 solidified this standard by starting at 500 gigabytes as the minimum capacity and quickly introduced 1 terabyte models, which became the standard storage for the PS4 Pro. The biggest leap, however, occurred with the PlayStation 5 and the replacement of the HDD with an ultra-fast SSD. The initial model was released with an unusual 825 gigabytes capacity, although its newer, slim models upgrade this to a standard 1 terabyte. Finally, the PlayStation 5 Pro doubled this capacity, launching with a 2 terabyte SSD. This evolutionary path from 1 megabyte just for save data to 2 terabytes for installing entire 100 gigabyte games clearly demonstrates the exponential growth of the gaming industry. Disk capacity. An examination of the game media types used in PlayStation consoles shows a fundamental transformation, especially when compared to the era before it. Before PlayStation, the industry was dominated by cartridges. These media were expensive, had very limited capacity that was usually measured in megabits, MB, and by the end of that era, on 16-bit consoles, reached a maximum of 32 or 48 megabits, equivalent to only 4 to 6 megabytes. Game saving was also typically done via internal batteries on the cartridge or with password systems. The PlayStation 1 completely broke this pattern by introducing the CD with a 700 megabyte capacity. This change not only made it possible to deliver much larger games with cinematic videos, but it also separated the concept of saving from the game media itself by introducing the separate memory card. The next generation, the PlayStation 2, continued this leap with the DVD and by supporting single-layer DVD discs 4.7 gigabytes as well as dual-layer discs 8.5 gigabytes for larger games, it became a home entertainment center. The next turning point was the PlayStation 3, which by introducing the Blu-ray drive entered Sony into the HD format war and won. Blu-ray discs with a base capacity of 25 gigabytes single layer and 50 gigabytes dual layer were essential for the HD gaming era, although the high cost of this new technology led to the high price of the console itself. Interestingly, the PlayStation 4 and PS4 Pro continue to use the same standard Blu-ray discs up to 50 gigabytes for games, but in a controversial decision, Sony did not include the ability to play 4K UHD Blu-ray movies in them. This shortcoming was finally addressed in the PlayStation 5. This console, in the disc-based version, is equipped with an Ultra HD Blu-ray drive, which not only supports triple-layer game discs up to 100 gigabyte capacity, but also brought 4K movie playback capability back to the family. Time between console releases. The release pattern of Sony's PlayStation consoles reveals an interesting trend in generational life cycles. Starting with the PlayStation 1 in 1995 North American release, Sony waited about 5 years to launch the PlayStation 2 in 2000. This cycle extended slightly for the next generation, as the PlayStation 3 was released in 2006, approximately 6 years after its predecessor. Following that, Sony appeared to adopt a longer life cycle. The PlayStation 4 arrived in November 2013, marking a full 7-year gap from the PS3. In the middle of that generation, Sony began a new strategy by introducing Pro versions. The PlayStation 4 Pro was released in November 2016, exactly 3 years after the original PS4, to provide a mid-generational upgrade. Sony maintained the 7-year pattern for the next generation as well, launching the PlayStation 5 in November 2020, 7 years after the PS4. Subsequently, the PlayStation 5 Pro continued this mid-gen upgrade cycle in November 2024, 4 years after the original PS5. Given these consistent patterns, it can be concluded with high confidence that Sony has adhered to a 7-year life cycle for its main console generations. If this trend continues, it is logical to expect the PlayStation 6 to be released 7 years after the PlayStation 5, which would be around the year 2027. The console production life cycle. An examination of the production life cycle of PlayStation consoles reveals Sony's long-term hardware support strategy. The PlayStation 1, released in 1994, had a very long market presence, with production continuing until March 2006. This means more than 11 years of production support, which continued long after the release of its successor, PS2. However, the real record holder in this regard is the PlayStation 2. This popular console, released in 2000, incredibly remained in production until January 2013, nearly 13 full years. This means the PS2 was still being manufactured even after the PlayStation 3 was released. The PlayStation 3 followed a similar path. With a long lifespan, its production finally ceased in May 2017, marking a production cycle of approximately 10.5 years. However, with the arrival of the PlayStation 4 generation, this pattern appears to have started changing. Sony began winding down production of this generation much earlier than before. In early 2021, coinciding with the ramp-up of PS5 production, Sony officially discontinued most PS4 models, including all PS4 Pro models. Although production of the base PS4 Slim version continued in a limited capacity for a time to cover market demand due to global PS5 shortages, its active production life cycle, about 8 years until the discontinuation of main models, was clearly shorter than the previous 3 generations. But it was the PlayStation 4 Pro, PS4 Pro, that had a unique life cycle. This console, released in November 2016, remained in production for just over 4 years before being discontinued in January 2021. At the same time, PS5 production was scaling up. This move by Sony to focus on the new generation resulted in the PS4 Pro having by far the shortest production life of any main PlayStation home console. Currently, the PlayStation 5 is at the peak of its production cycle, and along with newer versions like the Pro, holds the full focus of Sony's production lines. This data indicates that although Sony historically kept its consoles in production for over a decade, the recent strategy with the PS4 demonstrates a more rapid transition of resources to the new generation and an earlier exit of older models from mass production. Launch price. An examination of the launch prices for PlayStation consoles clearly shows Sony's fluctuating strategy between aggressive pricing and the use of expensive technology. This path began with the PlayStation 1 in 1995, which established itself as a powerful and affordable option at a $299 price point. Sony repeated this winning formula with the PlayStation 2 in 2000, once again launching it at the same $299 price, which played a key role in its unrivaled success. However, in 2006, Sony took a completely different path with the PlayStation 3. This console was launched in 2 models, $499 for the 20GB version and $599 for the 60GB version. This pricing, driven by the use of new and costly technologies like the Blu-ray drive and the cell processor, was egregiously higher than its main competitors. The Xbox 360 at $299 or $399, and the Nintendo Wii at $249. This exorbitant price acted as a major barrier to entry for buyers and is considered one of the fundamental reasons for the PS3's initial failure and its very weak start in that generation. Sony learned from this major mistake and launched the PlayStation 4 in 2013 at a much more competitive $399. And even the mid-generation PS4 Pro was launched at the same $399 price. In the current generation, the PlayStation 5 was released with two price points: $499 for the disc version and $399 for the digital version. Finally, the PlayStation 5 Pro at $699 has once again shown that Sony is willing to set higher prices to deliver more power in its mid-generation cycles. Sell. An examination of PlayStation console sales figures provides a clear picture of Sony's market dominance and its successful and unsuccessful generational strategies. This legacy began with the PlayStation 1, which achieved global success with final sales of 102.4 million units. But it was the PlayStation 2 that, with its stunning and unattainable sales of over 160 million units, set the record for the best-selling console in history. And to this day, no device has been able to reach this figure. In contrast, the PlayStation 3 had a slow start due to its high initial price and ultimately registered the weakest performance among Sony's home consoles, with sales of 87.4 million units. Sony learned from this failure and made a powerful comeback with the PlayStation 4, as this generation concluded with fantastic sales of 117.2 million units. It was during this generation that we saw the release of the PS4 Pro. Although Sony never released its sales figures separately, analysts estimate that the Pro model accounted for about 15 to 20% of total PS4 sales after its launch, which equates to an estimated 23 to 24 million units sold. The current generation, the PlayStation 5, despite initial production challenges, has reached sales of 84.2 million units by the end of September 2025 and continues on its path at a pace similar to the PS4. The PlayStation 5 Pro, which was released in November 2024, has had a strong start. In Japan, its first week's sales surpassed the PS4 Pro, and globally, its launch helped push the total sales of the PS5 family in November 2024 to over 4 million units. Although it is still too early to estimate its long-term sales, initial data shows it has been well received despite its higher price. In summary, aside from the third generation stumble, PlayStation has always been an unrivaled sales machine in the gaming industry. Launch titles. An examination of the number of launch titles for each PlayStation generation shows the evolution of Sony's strategy and the readiness of its ecosystem in each period. This path began with the PlayStation 1 North American launch, which had a modest but strong launch lineup of about 12 titles, including games like Ridge Racer and Rayman. But it was the PlayStation 2 that set the standard with one of the strongest and largest launch lineups in history. This console launched in North America with around 29 diverse titles, from SSX and Tekken Tag Tournament to Madden, which quickly turned it into a commercial success. In contrast, the PlayStation 3 had a disappointing start. Its launch lineup of about 14 titles was not only weak in number, but, aside from Resistance, Fall of Man, also lacked a compelling exclusive title, which combined with the high price contributed to its slow start that generation. Sony corrected the score with the PlayStation 4 and by understanding the importance of indie and digital games, delivered a strong launch lineup of over 20 titles, including exclusives, cross-gen and indie games like Resogun. Meanwhile, the concept of launch games is completely different for mid-generation consoles. The PlayStation 4 Pro had no exclusive launch games, as its lineup was the entire PS4 library. The PlayStation 5, however, marked one of the strongest starts with a modern, high-quality strategy, featuring about 15 to 20 new titles, including major exclusives like Demon's Souls and Spider-Man, Miles Morales, as well as full access to the PS4 library. Finally, the PlayStation 5 Pro followed the exact same pattern as the PS4 Pro, launching with no exclusive titles and relying on the existing PS5 library and the promise of enhanced games. Exclusive games. An examination of the exclusive title in PlayStation's history showcases the primary reason for the brand's success and identity. This legacy began with the PlayStation 1, which set new standards with revolutionary titles like Metal Gear Solid and Gran Turismo. The PlayStation 2 took this dominance to its absolute peak with an unrivaled library of trend-setting exclusives like God of War, Shadow of the Colossus, and Ratchet & Clank. The PlayStation 3, despite a difficult start, focused on cinematic experiences and introduced masterpieces like the Uncharted trilogy and, most importantly, The Last of Us to the world. The PlayStation 4 was the pinnacle of this strategy, a golden age where every exclusive game like Bloodborne, Marvel's Spider-Man, Uncharted 4, and the God of War remake was considered a reason to buy the console on its own. However, it was precisely near the end of this generation and the beginning of the PlayStation 5 that Sony suddenly changed its decades-old policy. The company began porting its biggest and most valuable assets to the PC. Really, who would have thought one could ever play God of War or The Last of Us on PC? Currently, and in the era of the PlayStation 5 console, many games, albeit with a delay, are also making their way to other platforms. Total title released. An examination of the total number of games released for each PlayStation generation paints an astonishing picture of the industry's scale and evolution. Counting the exact title is very difficult, as these statistics include all regional versions, digital and physical games, and independent titles. Starting out, the PlayStation 1 launched a revolution by using the CD medium, building a vast library that exceeded expectations. Its total number of titles is estimated at around 4,100 games. However, no console has managed to reach the extraordinary and verified record of the PlayStation 2. This console, thanks to 13 years of support and unparalleled global popularity, possesses a massive global library of 11,000 game titles. This number includes all games released for it worldwide, turning the platform into an unrivaled giant in history. With the arrival of the PlayStation 3 generation and the complexities of HD game development, this figure was expected to decline, but factoring in physical title and the growth of the digital store, the PS3 also registered a large library with over 5,100 game titles. But it was the PlayStation 4 that changed the definition of a game library. With the emergence of the independent indie game revolution and the ease of digital publishing, the number of titles literally exploded. Comprehensive estimates show that the PS4 surpassed even the PS2's record, having over 12,000 games, including all digital and independent titles in its store. Currently, the PlayStation 5, which has only been out for 5 years, is growing rapidly, thanks to the continuation of the same digital and independent trend, with nearly 4,000 titles released for it so far. In conclusion, although the PS2, with around 11,000 titles, was the absolute king of physical and regional games in its era, the PS4 and PS5, by fully embracing the digital and independent revolution, have pushed the boundaries of accessible title counts to much higher figures.